So my name is Kiyoto. I work at this company called Data. We're the original author of the software, Fluentd open source log management software. And can I get a quick show of hands? How many of you have heard of it, like Fluentd? Oh, that's pretty good. How many of you have used it? What? Awesome. Then I can go back and tell our CTO that I have a conversion rate of like 7%. So that's me on the internet. That's actually me last year. I tend to look down even when I talk. And apparently it started very early on. That's me when I was 4. So I haven't really changed. So I'm gonna, if I look down, like start clapping so that I know that I'm looking down. But that's right. And then, yeah, I work for this company, and they'll probably appreciate it if I show the logo. So
look at the camera.
Thank you. So I tend to be very skeptical of other people telling me stuff. So I'm going to qualify why you shouldn't listen to me. I'm not an ops engineer. And how many of you here like consider yourselves as like ops person? So what else are you guys? Programmers, dev. Marketing. I'm in marketing, so product. Awesome. So hopefully, like my talk is not going to really offend any contingency, but I am a marketing person. I work in developer marketing, and especially focusing on our open source technologies. Fluentd is the biggest one, but we are also the original author of Message Pack, which is a binary JSON-like serialization protocol. And also my laptop is a ThinkPad running Windows, and it's like instantly losing street cred probably. But also, here are the reasons why you should listen to me. I'm one of the core maintainers of Fluentd, and I mainly focus on community management. And community management in this context is actually very technical, answering all sorts of questions on the mailing list. We just reached 500 threads. My name is probably on like 400 of them. And I used to be a programmer, very active in open source stuff. And there's actually one patch in PHP that I landed, and it was for OpenSSL. So I guess it was like a lost cause to begin with. And I'm also a data nerd. Before I started to work here at Data, I worked in finance, doing a lot of number crunching. So the topic of today is why Fluentd, like why not like rsync, for example. And by way of like talking a little bit more about myself, because I haven't clearly talked enough about myself, I used to be a data scientist, and before it was cool. More specifically, I worked as a quantitative analyst in finance. And that's like a less sexy term for data scientist, because this is what I did. You acquire data, and you try to like analyze it, and you sort of ruminate on your findings, and you tell the traders what to do. And you rinse and repeat. I did that for 2.5 years, straight out of school, studying math and computer science. And like that step is like very small in this diagram. But in reality, it goes something like this. So you acquire data, and so you think. And it's like, what? Like, there's this thing that says invalid UTF-8, and like, I have no idea. So like, you fix the encoding issues, like Latin 1 and all that stuff. Then you run your analysis in MATLAB, R, Excel, and you get like this like division by 0. Like some columns are missing. How is this possible? So like, you know, you yell at the engineers. I was on the research side. I was like, I go to the data engineers. It's like, how come those are missing? It's like, oh, the switch failed, and like this didn't load. It's gonna take another 2 days. I'm like, I'm the one who's gonna get yelled at by engineers. I mean, sorry, traders. And like you repeat. I did this for 2.5 years, and like eventually I ran out of patience, and I was like, God, this is not that hard, right? So I was like, just show me the logs. And they're like, are you sure? Like, yeah, just show me the logs. I'm gonna parse it myself. It looks like this. And I'm like, maybe this is not the data engineer's fault. Maybe there's some like greater issue. So I actually talked to a lot of customers at Treasure Data, and we are a big data service company. And one of the things that I learned is, in many organizations, the priority of logging is not really high. Like if you went up to like a product person, like what do you think about like log management? They're like, what? Okay, if you go to CEO, it's like, hey, I think you guys should start structuring your logs and manage it better. It's like, well, like I need to raise money, right? But what's actually very high priority is analytics. Everyone wants to know how well their like design is doing, how their feature is doing, and everyone's like, hey, like how can I tell like if this like new variation that I propose is better than your version, right? And the connection here is you need logs to do honest analytics. And this is actually something that a lot of people don't realize, especially when you start to grow more predictably and you start to like tweak little things here and there to like increase the number of signups. Or when you get to that phase, what you realize is like, oh my God, I don't have enough data to actually check what we're doing is right. Because we totally skipped that like logging and thinking about that issue earlier. So the lesson here is you need logs anyway, so start managing it today. Your service or feature or product or company might grow like in like 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, and you're gonna need that log. And because some of you are ops, and this is something that they've touched on, outage is like something that everyone notices. Like nobody pays attention to like operations until like shit hits the fan. And everyone starts like panicking, right? Why is the website down? Or like, why are like all these users complaining? And logs, you need logs to troubleshoot outages. And especially, you need it for 2 reasons. One is like to fix it in the first place. Like you need to know what the hell is going on. But when you're doing post hoc analysis, you do need that logs handy so that you can actually run stats on them. So logs are important. Log everything. And like in many organizations that I've seen, people start to realize this, like, okay, we need to start logging stuff so that we actually know what's going on. But because this is done in a very, very uncoordinated manner using like rsync script here, Python script here, like per one-liner there, and this was the case at the finance firm that I worked at, you get a system like this. And it's a gigantic mess. Like, I have this, I only care about the data coming from the mobile app because I'm the PM for it. So I'm going to ask my engineer to get the data from that. And I'm going to put it into MongoDB because that's what I look at. And the other person is like, oh, I have those log files. And I'll parse them and put it into Hadoop to do those MapReduce jobs. And they start to interdepend on each other. And before you know it, it becomes very, very unmanageable. And this is a big risk for a VP of engineering or CTO or anyone who is ultimately responsible for the technological future of the company. And this is gonna look really markety, but this is what we try to achieve with Fluentd. We call it a unified logging layer, but essentially have this one piece of middleware in between your data sources and data destinations to take care of routing, filtering, and aggregating and such. So that's why we built it. So I'm going to give you a very simple overview. It has a ton of stuff, and I have like 30, 40 minutes. But I'm more than happy to dive into the details if you guys have any question at the end. So I'm going to start with everyone's favorite example, which is Apache logs. Like when I talk to customers, it seems to me that most of the data just come from Apache web servers. And Apache logs look something like this. It's fairly readable. Like at first glance, you wouldn't know what those dashes are. But eventually, you figure out it's something like this. I put it as a JSON. There's a host, a user method, path, HTTP status code, yada, yada, yada. And that's actually the first thing that Fluentd does, and it's one of its key features, which is it tries to structure logs as data sources. So you have all these data sources, and when it's coming in, it gets parsed as JSON. Sorry. Then it gets parsed as JSON, but the natural question now is, how does Fluentd know where to send the data to? Like, how does it know? Like, it needs to send a bunch of logs into MongoDB, but Twitter feeds into, like, I don't know, Logly, let's say. The key is we actually have a little metadata attached to the core data. So it parses the logs, and it has two other pieces of data that comprises the smallest unit of data. We call it Fluentd events. One is timestamp. When did it come? And the other is tag, which is the second one up there. It says like web.access. So what tag does is tag tells Fluentd where to send the data to. And you'll see this better with a configuration file later. But at the highest level, from like 3,000 foot view, this is what it does. When the data comes in, you assign it a tag so that Fluentd knows which tag goes to which data destinations. That's, to be honest, it. That's what it is. But I am going to give you examples from actually someone else's slide, if I know how to do this. Oh. Need to get out. There it is. Yeah, so one other maintainer gave a talk at the Red Dot RubyConf last month. And he talked about Fluentd Patterns. So I'm going to go through them quickly, because what I realized is, like, I've given talks where I just went through all the architecture, and people started to look like, okay, I'm going to go to Twitter, Facebook, like, this is so complex. So I'm going to talk about how you can actually use it, so that at least you'll be interested. One is very simple. Relogs from somewhere, like files, and output it to somewhere else. Well, you read it from one file and put it into another file. So imagine you have like 2,000 web servers. You want to aggregate all of your logs into a central server and zip it up. That's something you can do with Fluentd. But maybe you want to put it into MongoDB because someone else in the organization is using it, and like you want to do analytics in it. There's a plugin for that. So you can just like write out to MongoDB. Maybe you want to put it into MySQL. Maybe you want to put it to Elasticsearch, Hadoop HDFS, and the list goes on. There are actually about 300 plugins now, and I'm pretty sure like 100, some of them are output plugins supporting different storage layers.
Do you have to write the plugins in Ruby?
You have to, yes. But I'm pretty sure for your data source, there's a plugin for it already. Sorry, data destination. Redshift, BigQuery, and I believe there's one for Logly too, but I'm not sure. And the second one is it's almost like data relay middleware. So like the input events come in, I don't know, like TCP packets, like syslog events, and it forwards into like other machines. And it basically intelligently routes so that, like, for this event, I'm going to send it there. As for this event, I'm going to send it down there.
Do any of the outputs have support for like encryption or authentication?
It's going to come up. There's one that sends data over SSL. And this is more of the same, except here you can actually do failovers. So if you send heartbeat, and if it doesn't respond, it fails over to the other one and starts sending it to that one. And also, it supports weighted load balancing among different destination Fluentd nodes. So it can sort of act as logging load balancer as well. And this is the one about SSL. There's a plugin called Secure Forward, which allows you to send data from Fluentd to Fluentd over SSL. What we don't have yet is encryption over TCP and HTTP. So that when the data is coming into Fluentd, that'd be an issue. And connect with other middleware. A lot of people are already using some kind of logging or some kind of other data ingestion middleware. And it's always a tough sell to just like, oh, you should gut it out and replace it with my new awesome thing. Like, that doesn't work. So we try to coexist with other middleware. And there's like plugins for that. So syslog, Flume, Scribe, Kafka are pretty popular ones. And this is a very common use case too. When you're trying to test like a new data storage system, you probably want to keep a copy and store it somewhere that you know is safe, like whether it's S3 or local file system. There's a plugin for that. It's called Copy. It copies data streams as many times as you want, and send it to one data destination, and send a copy, the exact duplicate, into another system. And here's where it gets pretty interesting. A lot of people use it just to like aggregate data and store into like target systems. But some people actually try to do more using the filter-like mechanism that we have. So this one is, it's filtering data, I think. No, it's counting events by string values. So this is almost like time-windowed group bias that you can do against the data. And something like this allows you to do like anomaly detection. So like if you start to see a lot of 500 status codes, chances are good something is wrong with your web server. So you can send alerts, again, using Fluentd. And another one is like by number values. You can take like weighted average, moving average, max, min with time windows. Like this is like stuff that you might do in Graphite, but run it against like a time window thing. And he actually had a lot of examples. Here's another interesting use case, sorry, Chris is there, is usually the data comes in as data stream, right? Like the TCP packets, or like you're telling a log, and like you can sort of think of log as a data stream. But also, Fluentd can act as like a cron, in that it can run a program and to get the results out and put it into like different systems. So there's actually, how many of you know dstat? Yeah, so it's like dstat is this Python utility program that's like vimstat, netstat, and all of that combined to one nice thing that sort of acts like top. So there's a plugin called dstat, and when you enable it and run it, what it does is like every X seconds, it runs dstat and pipe the output of dstat into Fluentd. So that's one use case. And the demo that I'm going to show you is going to use the Twitters. So there's a plugin called in Twitter, which allows you to get data from Twitter as data stream and put it into somewhere else. All right, so going back to my presentation. So all these patterns are really nice, but I also promised to talk about like in production use cases. So here are a few. So the first one is, by the way, I love this guy. Like he makes my internet much better. In DevOps is not correct shit hit fan, but shit hit load balance. His English is like, probably better than mine. So this is the use case at Slideshare. They were actually one of the earliest adopters of Fluentd. And the problem that they were trying to solve was like, as they scale their company and like the reach of the service, they really wanted to make sure that they were not just like adding more and more operations folks with their expanding infrastructure. So they wanted to automate the system of monitoring their systems. So what they did is they created this system called Skynet. And there's a whole blog article about that. But what they do is they instrument every single middleware that they run on their like 500 some servers. So basically, Fluentd is installed on each server, and they collect data like HA proxy logs, Nginx logs, load balancers, how many concurrent connections there are. And all of that data is streamed into their backend system, which I think uses MongoDB. And there's like a query API that they wrote in Rails against it. So like their operations folks can look at the health of the system. Their non-technical people can look at the dashboard and see like what's trending, how many people are visiting the website, and so forth. And the key here is that there are tools that keep track of like application level statistics, like Google Analytics, right? like this page has been visited this many times. And there are tools to investigate systems metrics. Like Nagios is a pretty good one. But what they really liked about Fluentd was they could build their own system on top of Fluentd that would actually correlate it to. So for example, like the operations engineer on call gets paged. And he wants to know if it's a middleware issue or maybe like application code being written poorly and he needs to triage, right? And getting all of that data into a single place really, really accelerates the process of figuring out where the root cause is. And so that's Slideshare. I highly recommend reading the blog entry. There is a section about Fluentd, but it's more like Fluentd as part of their bigger operations and automation / mod system. The other tweet is, I'll let you guys read. I don't even know what this means, to be honest, but it was kind of fun. And the only way that this is relevant to my next example is that they have a lot of data. The company is called Gree. It's a Japanese social gaming company, and they're a pretty big company. They're public, actually. And what they do is they use Fluentd for in-game analytics. So this is not really operations. It's more like applications analytics and product analytics. So how they set it up is they have 2,000 plus game servers, ranging from like hundreds to like a few dozens per title. And they want to collect all the data about like clicks, which users dropping off where, and all of that. And they do this with Fluentd in the background, collecting data from applications directly, and send it to aggregator nodes for better throughput. So those guys are just like focusing on getting data, like accepting like incoming data and like just passing on to the aggregators. And aggregators batch them up and pass it back to their backend. And the backend does all the analytics, and like there's like dashboard and all that stuff. So they do about 1 billion events per day. And they've been using us pretty heavily for the past 2 years or so. And so I'm supposed to do a demo. Hopefully the internet is with me. So this is what I did. And how many of you watched the World Cup? Yeah. So I was fairly productive throughout the whole thing. Not really, but. So what I decided to do for this is I use Fluentd to collect a lot of tweets, specifically the ones that have the hashtag Netherlands and Argentina. And I put it into like our backend system, but that's not really the important part. The idea is this is like a less traditional use of Fluentd, but getting tweets in and sending it to a output destination. And what I did was I took all these tweets and tokenized them and tallied out like the word frequency. So throughout the game, what word is like tweeted how many times. So if I have the internet, I should be able to show you like an example. Can you guys see that? So I'm not sure if the color is really good. So it's like, so right now it says Netherlands, Argentina. And I don't know if you guys remember the match, but it was 0-0 and came down to penalty kicks. And like Argentina won 4-2. Are you from Argentina?
No.
Okay. Wait, who here is from Argentina? Or the Netherlands? I don't want to offend either, so. Okay. So like you can do like a couple of fun things. Like one is like Messi. Hopefully this is gonna run. Oh, there you go. Yeah, so when he made a goal, he was really, everyone was talking about him. So the other person who made it was on the Netherlands team, Robin. Okay, so Robin is there. So let's add a guy who missed it, Snyder. And yeah, like he gets mentioned a lot, right? So then like you can do a couple of cool things like card, foul, and like there is a correlation, but a lot of people are talking about yellow and like red cards more than foul. And the other thing that I thought was, I did notice like just reading my Twitter stream, like people have like they make good use of profanity. So one thing I actually did, and it's funny, like I showed this at work, and the first word that everyone typed was the F word. And people were very, very upset during the penalty. So much more than like I put something that's slightly less offensive. And apparently that didn't do justice for the anger. So
it's because the F word's more universal across the world.
I believe, yeah. Yeah, so
this demo that you're showing is, you have Fluent, do you want me asking a question?
Sure.
So you've got Fluentd and it's polling the Twitter API
yes.
for those things. It parses it and then it spits out JSON.
Yeah.
And it has broken it up. But of course, the analysis you're showing here is some JavaScript code driving queries to a Postgres database, correct?
So what you're seeing there is, oops.
I'm curious how the data is stored in Postgres. I don't know if that's too low level.
Sure, I can show you. It is. Okay, so. Yep, and this is the only way you can do this when you're on Windows. If the internet is.
If it's true, I was just curious on what stage.
Yeah, I can release the code.
But it was being indexed. It's basically it's indexed then in the database.
Yeah. So the real reason why I did this way is I couldn't code fast enough so that I couldn't launch the thing while the game is going on. But in theory, a lot of this can be done online without actually having something like treasure data in between.
You need treasure data is doing a lot of the magic here.
So what treasure data is doing is it takes the tweet, right, which is like, I love Messi, for example, and it like normalizes it and tokenizes it so that it's I love and Messi. Then and it just runs one big SQL job that tallies that up per word per minute. So yeah, what I learned over time is like I can show you the command line demo and like it looks pretty visually boring. So I just decided to throw together some front end against the data. And yeah, so that's pretty much it in terms of speaking. So I'd love to take any questions about Fluentd or the World Cup.
Can you talk about the scalability of Fluentd? Like
sure.
How big installations get?
Yeah, sure. So the honest answer is it depends. But when you have like a reasonably powered machine with like minimum like just accepting data coming from a downstream Fluentd node and sending it to another Fluentd node, it can achieve about like 13 to 17,000 messages per core. And the thing is, one thing I didn't say is Fluentd is written in a combination of Ruby and C. But it's mostly Ruby with all the performance critical parts in C. So the problem is the global interpreter lock. And there are a couple of ways around this. One is run it in multi-process mode so that you'd be essentially running multiple Fluentd processes on a single machine as to take advantage of multiple CPUs. And the other is sort of like, and this is where the forwarder aggregator pattern comes in. When you have a lot of like incoming requests, just like accepting those is going to take up a lot of CPU. So you basically defer the task of parsing that data and structuring it as JSON to your downstream aggregator service. That's another way to do it.
Is it the idea here? It's kind of just like a lot of the other logging frameworks, is to try to get the data in a structured data
yep.
as much as you can.
Yep.
So like people use like log4j, like JSON output to
Yep.
try to get things in and
Yep.
just save all that CPU time.
Yeah, I mean, there's this like age-old argument of are the logs for people or machines, right? And the answer is both. And the thing is, like, those two are not even like mutually exclusive propositions. Like JSON is eminently readable. Like hell, it's probably more readable than certain text formats because it's actually annotated with the semantic meanings attached to each field. So we chose JSON pretty much because it is the most popular one in the web world. It could have been something else. But yeah, the key thing is that as soon as you get the data, you want to assign it a reasonable structure that's flexible, but also it allows different people to understand what it is. And I have this theory that the farther apart the site of data acquisition and the site of like data usage are, the site of like the data being parsed semantically are, the more trouble there is in the organization. Is when I was a trader, like a quantitative trader, what would happen is I'd be writing my Python script, and all of a sudden my prediction starts like awry, right? And I realize that my parser is wrong now, and that's because the software engineers changed the format. And this shouldn't happen, right? Like if I was always getting JSON, like at least when things started to go bad, I was like, all right, the field name is different. Probably something changed downstream. So like a lot of people ask me like, should I use Logstash? Should I use Heckas? Should I use like your thing? And my answer is like, yes. use something that allows you to structure and manage your logs like much better than I'm going to rsync those files and I'm going to run this my script because I just need like those three fields. Like that's not going to scale.
Is Fluentd like commercial software?
No, sorry. It's open source, Apache 2.0 licensed. Some plugins are MIT. That depends on like MIT or something else possibly because that depends on the plugin author. But everything in the core is 2.0. Yeah.
What's the role of treasure data other than creating this to use?
That's a really good question. Maybe I should never learn the answer because I get paid to work on open source. What we realize is that, so treasure data is a cloud service. We provide big data managed service on the cloud so that our customers can focus on analytics and actually analyzing data as opposed to like data plumbing and like scaling out to like hundreds of servers. We do all of that elastically and automatically. But what we realize that if you have any cloud service, the data has to get to your service somehow. And it doesn't magically happen. So we actually originally wrote Fluentd as our data collector. But then we realized that our customers wanted to use it, but it hurt our feelings a little bit, but they're like, I'm actually not so sure about sending my like PCI compliance data to you guys. But I still want to send it to our like own on-premises backend. Like, can you guys open source it? So that's what we did. And it's been a very, very good experiment, I would say. Like having part of our technology open source and being used with like various other systems, because it's not like we can do everything, right, as a company. So that's the idea. We'll see how well the experiment goes.
One thing you haven't really talked about is actually sending data to Fluentd. Can I send flat text? Can I send JSON? Can I send proto-web encoded data?
Yeah, so that's actually handled by the. So I didn't talk about plugins because that would get into that would be fairly complex. So plugin has this pluggable architecture, and mainly there are input plugins and output plugins. So output plugins is straightforward. You buffer data and output to different systems. Input plugins is what enables you to get data into Fluentd. So there's in-forward, which assumes the data is coming from another Fluentd instance. There's in-tail, which tails log files. There's in-TCP, which is arbitrarily TCP packets, and you give it a parser. There's in-syslog. I just use in-Twitter, which basically pulls Twitter and get the data in. So, and so forth.
So if I want, for example, protobuf encoded data sending over to, let's say, Mongo,
Yep.
I do, in TCP with the, protobuf converter,
Yep.
and then I'd send to Mongo, and that's
Yeah.
it.
So if the data is coming in as a protocol buffer, you probably need to write a parser for it. But there's a parser plugin framework inside, like the core language.
So it's plug and play.
Yep.
What are the most common architectures? Like you were saying earlier, like Kibana is really awesome to be able to look at stuff. Like, are a lot of people taking like Fluentd and putting things into Elasticsearch and looking at them with Kibana, or what are the most common like architectures?
Yeah, so there are two common use cases. One is definitely Elasticsearch, Kibana. And I mean, there's Logstash too. And I don't think that layer, like I have nothing mean to say about Logstash in that regard. I even tell some people that, hey, if you use Logstash, you get the commercial support from Elasticsearch. The other use case, though, is a lot of our users use it with like analytics backend, like whether it's Hadoop, or sometimes it's like Redshift, which is like database by Amazon, a BigQuery, which is like also like an analytic database by Google. And I think part of the reason is probably where we started. Like we built this originally to address our customers' needs to collect application logs for analytics. So a lot of people probably drew inspiration from that and started using with their own analytics backend. But at the end of the day, it is like a log collector. So wherever you want to get the data from, get it and put it wherever you want.
I got another one.
Yep.
So one thing, for example, let's say I'm personally using Scribe, and one thing that's nice with Scribe is, things are very simple. You cannot do anything on it, right?
Yep.
You go from point A to point B. So Fluentd, you can do a lot of things, right? You can go from point A, convert, do some calculations,
Yep.
send to point B, send to point 3, etc., which kind of increase the risk of, for example, losing packets or stuff like that. Does Fluentd do anything to add with that?
Yeah, so that's a good point that I also glossed over, which is Fluentd has a very, very, pretty well-designed buffering system. So by default, you can choose to buffer either in memory or on disk, and it retries with like the exponential backoff. And so that is like node to node, like with like just like one node to one node. But one of the examples that I showed is you can actually have Fluentd configured to talk to multiple backends with like some of the secondary failover nodes, so that like you're sending to node A like all the time, then the node A stops responding to your heartbeat, then you actually fail over to node B and start sending data there. Yep.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. So if you have any other question, you can find me on Twitter. That's actually the last slide that I didn't even get to. Here you go.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.
That's everything you need to, or this shows, yeah, that's everything you need to know. So.